This video illustrates slicers, a great way to filter introduced in Excel 2010. Once you know about slicers, you will probably use them for most of your pivot table reports. I will again use the online purchases dataset for illustration. I have already created a pivot table that breaks down sum of total spent by customer region and customer gender. There are also 3 other fields in the filters area, and I have already filtered out some of the items. You can see by the filter signs that filters are in place for each of the fields in the filters area. But can you tell which items have been filtered out? No, you can't, at least not without looking at the drop-down lists for these fields. This is a serious disadvantage. Pivot table reports are supposed to be transparent, but these certainly aren't. This is where slicers enter the picture. They provide a graphical alternative to placing fields in the filters area. Actually, you can use both, but once you get used to them, you will probably prefer to use only slicers. I will first clear the filters and remove the fields from the filters area. Then I will insert slicers for these same 3 fields. I can do this from the Pivot Table Tools Analyze ribbon, or I can even do it from the Insert ribbon if a cell within the pivot table is selected. Either opens a list where I can choose as many slicers as I like. This opens a slicer for each selected field with a button for each of the categories. I can move or resize these slicers as I like. Then by holding down the Control key, I can select as many items as I like, and the others will be filtered out. Specifically, the blue items will show in the pivot table and the white items will be filtered out. I've made the same choices as I made earlier for the filters. However, it is now visibly clear what the filters are. Note the 2 buttons at the top of each slicer. The one on the left is a multi-select button introduced in Excel 2016 for use with touch devices. The red X button indicates that a filter is in place, and by clicking this red X, I can easily clear the filter on this field. Alternatively, to remove a slicer altogether, I can select it and press Delete. I'll delete each of these slicers. Note, however, that deleting the slicer does not remove the filters on these fields. I'll remove the filters in the Fields pane. There is another option that can come in handy. I can create slicers for fields that are already in the rows or columns areas, in this case customer region and/or customer gender. This provides another way to filter out rows or columns. You might find it tedious to filter fields in the rows and columns areas directly, so this provides an alternative way of doing it. A welcome timeline slicer was introduced in Excel 2013. This allows you to choose date filters easily, again through a graphical interface. I will illustrate this for the purchase date field. For example, I will create a filter where only sales for April and May show. Or by selecting day from the drop-down list, I can restrict the filter to certain days. You might have noticed that when a slicer is selected, a Slicer Tools Options or a Timeline Tools Options ribbon becomes available. As you can tell, most of the items on these ribbons are cosmetic for changing the slicer button colors, aligning the slicers, or changing their size, for example. You can experiment with the various options. Finally, if there are multiple pivot tables based on the same data, you can force slicers to apply to any or all of them. To do this, right-click a slicer and select Report Connections. This displays a list of the existing pivot tables, and you can check the ones you want this slicer to apply to. In summary, slicers, including timeline slicers, are graphical devices that make pivot table filters much more transparent. Fortunately, they are also extremely easy to use.